Now we're launching into another realm of your boating world with Mako. We're headed out onto the open water. If your boating plans keep you in protected waters like lakes and rivers, you might skip this section and go straight to Chapter 7. But if you'd like some tips on how to operate safely in heavier conditions, welcome aboard. Some of the required equipment is the same as on the lake. Running lights and anchor light, approved PFDs for all passengers, a Class 4 throwable device, a fire extinguisher, an audible signaling device, either a whistle or a horn, and the added requirement of flares and an anchor and line. Recommended but not required by law are the following items: backup anchor and line, long line for towing, a compass, first aid kit, tool kit, spare fuses, spare fuel filter, spare spark plugs and wrench, a sea anchor, mirror for signaling, extra fire extinguisher, waterproof flashlight, bucket or manual bilge pump, at least 1 gallon of water per person, charts, and life raft. In this electronic age, it would be bad judgment to not use all the safety advantages we have readily available. Your boat should have a built-in VHF radio, but a portable waterproof VHF unit is relatively inexpensive and could be a lifesaver. Same with an emergency position indicating radio beacon, or EPIRB unit. The newest of these are personal electronic locator transmitters that emit your GPS coordinates and a discrete code assigned to you to a satellite system that's monitored 24/7 worldwide. A waterproof bag for your cell phone is another great idea. If you need to call out your position, you'll want to have a global positioning satellite receiver, GPS. If you think about this list, it's just common sense. With every trip into open water, the risks need to be considered and planned for. If you're prepared and properly equipped, a potential disaster becomes, well, just another story to tell. Two considerations that we've mentioned before become doubly important on an open water trip: fuel planning and your float plan. The rule we mentioned earlier about fuel planning is a great one to live by. 1/3 of your total fuel for the trip out, 1/3 for the return, and 1/3 in reserve. We talked earlier about letting someone know where you're going and when you expect to return as an informal float plan. For an extended open water voyage, we recommend you use the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary's Float Plan form, which can be downloaded at www.floatplancentral.org. Fill it out and leave it with a friend or family member. It's a big ocean out there. Give yourself a better chance, just in case. Channel markers will keep you in safe water, but only if you read them correctly. Opposite sides of the channel are marked with red or green, but often they're not together. There might just be one marker, so you'll need to know which side is deep and which side is shallow, and that will depend on the waterway. Coming into port or headed up a river, it's pretty simple. Red, right, returning, meaning keep the red markers on your right or starboard. Obviously, you reverse that action when leaving port. But on the waterway, like the intercoastal waterway, you have to determine which color is on which side. A chart is the best reference, and your GPS will give you the same information. However, another simple to remember rule is green to the sea. In those places where the waterway parallels the Gulf or the ocean, green is toward the water and red is toward the land. Where it gets really tricky is converging waterways, where the simple rules are in conflict. Best to consult the chart. A little advice from local captains is a great idea too, because channels and sandbars are often changing quicker than the charts can reflect. If you're close to home in protected waters and the weather turns ugly, you just head for home. But if you're 20 miles out in open water and this happens, it's a whole different story. So learn to understand the weather and check it before every trip.
Mostly sunny in the morning, then becoming partly cloudy.
Your VHF radio has at least one weather channel for your vicinity, with constant updates on winds, wave heights, and storm predictions. Speaking of storms, some are more predictable than others. We know a hurricane's coming for days in advance, but local thunderstorms can pop up in a matter of minutes, spawning 60-mile-per-hour winds, hail, and lightning. Pay attention to what's going on around you and don't take chances. Storms are great to watch from the front porch, but not much fun on a small boat. And what about wave heights? How high is too big? And how do you know? Often the weather report will call for chop or light chop in coastal waters. These are generally small, less than 1 foot waves that can make your ride bumpy, but not unsafe. Waves are measured from trough to tip. When you hear a prediction for waves of 2 to 4 feet, you should start thinking about golfing instead of fishing. 2 to 4 is not unmanageable in the right size boat, but expect to be tossed around a bit. Most captains of anything less than 30 feet will opt to stay in port with 6-foot seas. A rolling 6-footer is one thing, but a breaking wave is another issue completely. Wind on the open sea can cause waves to break. When waves near shore or a sandbar, there's a mathematical formula involving wave height, wave length, and water depth that results in cresting or breaking. This is great for surfers, but not so great for boaters. If you want to know more, Google.com is a great source of information, but for practical purposes, know that relatively harmless rolling waves on open water can get very dangerous near shore. Many incidents happen in passes and inlets where a combination of wind, current, and shallow water can create rogue waves that can put even the most experienced captains in large boats in jeopardy. A couple of things you need to know about anchoring. Now these are the basics, and if you'd like to know more, Google anchoring techniques and choose from several excellent sources. First, the anchor needs to be of correct type for your use and sized properly to your boat. Your tracker dealer can help with this. Secondly, there needs to be a length of chain between the anchor and anchor line. This helps set and hold the anchor. Now there's no hard rule for the length of chain, but at least half the length of your boat is a good guideline. The longer the better. The chain and the line together is called the rode. Now thirdly, the line itself. Again, the strength and gauge needs to be matched to your boat. The amount of line or scope depends on the depth of water you'll be anchoring in. A conservative rule of thumb is a 7-to-1 ratio between the water depth and the amount of line paid out, but a smaller ratio of 4-to-1 will work under normal conditions. 25 feet of depth, 100 feet of rode. 200 feet of anchor line should be minimum equipment for any boat working offshore. Recovering your anchor is much easier as a team. If you're trying to haul it in manually by yourself, it's quite a workout. The simplest technique is for the captain to slowly motor toward the anchor while the crewman manages the retrieval of the line. When the anchor breaks loose and the boat is above the anchor, the boat should go to neutral to avoid catching the line in the prop. If the line is properly tailed, with the boat end at the bottom of the pile and the anchor end at the top, there will be no tangles when the anchor is deployed in the future. If the anchor is lodged, as it might become on a rocky bottom or near a wreck, do not use the boat's power to exert heavy pressure on the line. If you can't release it with gentle pressure and trying to pull it from different angles does not work, literally cut your losses. Cut the line and write that anchor off to experience. There have been too many incidents of failed cleats, boats forced underwater by the downward force generated in the tug-of-war with the bottom, lines tangled in props, and other issues that just make it not worth the risk. There is a technique for pre-rigging the anchor to break away when it's stuck hard in rocks or debris. It's a do-it-yourself process and involves using a connection that will break under heavy pressure, allowing the anchor to be pulled from a different angle. There are a few other good tips for anchoring and retrieving stuck anchors at yachtpals.com. But in open water, never tie the anchor line to the stern of the boat. Because when the line tightens, either by natural wave action or in a misguided effort to retrieve an anchor, the stern can be dragged underwater. How far can you swim? We mentioned a sea anchor in our recommended equipment list. A sea anchor is simply a method of creating drag to slow or direct your drift. It becomes a critical piece of equipment if you lost power in high seas. Dragging a sea anchor from the bow will keep the boat properly pointed into the waves. While we're on the subject of current and drift, let's talk about how to anticipate the current and the tides. At least once a day, the tides change in oceans and bays. Not only does this make navigation more critical, it also creates different currents to deal with at different times of the day. If you're not aware of the current in certain operations like docking or close maneuvering, you could find yourself in trouble quickly. Check pilings and channel markers for direction and speed of current. Look at high and low water indicators like barnacles, oysters, or water lines to determine where the tide is. That shortcut you took this morning at high tide might not be such a great idea at low tide. An outgoing tide pushing against an onshore wind in a narrow body of water can be a very bad combination, particularly if the waves are high and the water is shallow. Remember that picture we showed you earlier? These tips are just that, tips. If you're going to spend time on the open water, you owe it to yourself, your family, and your passengers to learn how to handle the boat and the conditions. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary is a good place to start, but there are literally hundreds of great books, articles, pamphlets, and courses that can offer you years and years of experience in a few short hours. Now let's get back to learning about your new boat.